Are you feeling lost in a sea of motorcycle helmets? I'm Vanessa Ruck in the XL Moto Garage, and today we're going to be talking about key things to think about in picking a motorcycle helmet. As one of the most important pieces of safety equipment on a motorcycle, the helmet takes a lot of thinking before you go out and buy one. There are so many options, different colors, different sizes, different styles, different features, and it can be a little bit of a minefield understanding which is going to be the best option for you. So in today's video, we are going to be talking through all of the common, most important things that you should be thinking about before going out and purchasing a motorcycle helmet. So first up, let's talk about the different style of helmets, because the style is going to vary depending on what sort of bike you're riding, what sort of conditions you're riding in, and the comfort and feel that you're going to want on your head. There are also pros and cons with every single different type of style. So first of all, we have the open face helmet. Here is a slightly more modernized twist on a modern open face helmet. But before we look at that, I really want to quickly show you a more traditional open face helmet. So this gives you pretty good protection on the top, back, and side of the heads, but it does have a rather open part on the face, hence it being an open face helmet. Now that does come with its advantages. One of those is your vision. You have much bigger field of vision, and you can most certainly see down what is around you because you haven't got the restriction of that helmet in your field of vision. You do then also get with that more of the elements to your face. So think about riding in the rain, think about bugs hitting you. You don't get the same protection from the elements or the protection if you would have a face impact. However, as I'm saying with all of these, each one of these helmet styles does have its pros and cons. So it's about working out what's going to be the most suitable for your riding, your style, and your desires for comfort and versatility. So that is a more traditional open face helmet. Here, the helmet with the open face has got a little bit of an advantage because they've put on a full visor. So it's going to get rid of some of that element to the limitations. Now they're typically held on with a double D-ring or quick release strap, as you would standard see across helmets. And they do have ranging features, which we'll get into later, but that's the rough concept of an open face helmet. So to recap, the pros and cons of this helmet: you've got great field of vision, you've got great ventilation, and it's going to be very easy to put on and off. The downside of this helmet is your safety with your chin being exposed, your exposure to the elements, and the level of protection without your face being covered up. Next up, we have a full-faced helmet. Now, this is an example of a full face. Kind of gives it away a little bit by the name, but you've got a solid chin bar on the helmet, which is going to give you full all-round protection to your face as well. Tends to be a little bit heavier just because of the additional materials, but that does totally depend on what material the helmet is made out of as well. And we're going to get into some of the materials a little bit later on in this video. Most open face helmets will have a full visor, as you can see here. That is going to give you protection both for the wind, the elements, but also bugs, stones coming towards you, and temperature as well, because you are kind of cocooned into the helmet. You are having a slightly smaller field of vision with this style of helmet, and there are again lots of different features that can be integrated into this helmet, which we'll get into a little bit later. So the pros are the high protection and the protection for the elements, so that's a safety and a practicality side. On the downside, you don't have the same access to be able to eat and drink should you want to with your helmet on. It's a little bit more clunky to get on and off because you've got to pull it up over the top. And that's the full face helmet. Moving on, we then have a hybrid version that kind of takes the technology of these two into a new flip-up version. I say new, they've been around some time. But what you're getting here, I'm going to try and demonstrate it, is you have a button somewhere on the helmet, there we go, and the chin will flip up. So this is turning your full face style helmet into an open face style. So you're going to get the practicalities of both, the features of both, you do have a slight limitation with the safety, because you've got to be quite careful when you're looking at these flip-up helmets as to how they are safety tested. Some of them are only safety tested with the flip chin down, and therefore they're not safe to ride with their chin up, and vice versa. So make sure you do look into the safety specs to see how you can ride in yours safety, knowing that it's going to protect your head and neck should you come off. And I say neck because your helmet not being fitted correctly can cause additional stress onto your neck if it was to start pulling and coming off awkwardly in an accident. So the pros and cons of a flip helmet: you are going to get the pros of the fact that you've got a bigger field of vision when you want it. You've got the practicality of being able to open it up to eat and drink, but you've also then got the safety element of being able to have a full chin bar when you want it, and the protection from the elements when you want it. On the downside with these helmets, they can be a little bit heavier and have a little bit worse on the wind noise side of things. It is also a factor to think about that the chin bar can fail on impact. Often that's down to user error with it not being fully engaged, but it's something very much worth thinking about. The last style helmet that we're going to look at today is the adventure helmet. Now, this is a born helmet for those that are wanting to suck up a little bit more of the on-off-road terrain. So it's got cues in styling and features to more of an enduro helmet. They have a very signature peak. That's one of the common things that you'll notice on these helmets, and they tend to have a much larger field of vision. Now, that is so that you could remove the visor and have space for goggles as an alternative, but also when you're riding in a more off-road environment, it tends to be more important having your vision being able to see the ground around you. Ventilation is also an element that is thought about a little bit more heavily in the adventure helmets, because if you're doing the mix of on and off road, you're probably going to get a little bit warmer whilst riding along. So looking at the adventure helmet, the pros are the slightly more aggressive style that goes along with the adventure helmet. You've got a wider field of vision, which gives you the practicality of being able to wear goggles and lots of ventilation. On the downside, adventure helmets can be a little bit on the heavier side. Again, it does depend what material helmet you're buying. And the peak can be something to think about if you're doing a lot of motorcycle miles, because that can catch the wind. So that's 4 different motorcycle styles. They all have their benefits and their drawbacks. So have a think about the sort of riding that you're going to be doing, what sort of conditions that you're going to be riding in, and the practicality that's going to make that a little bit more comfortable. And hopefully that will help you steer towards the right style for your riding. So next, let's have a think about some of the other things that are worth thinking about when picking a motorcycle helmet. There are lots of different materials out there that can build a modern motorcycle helmet. Now, more traditionally, motorcycle helmets were made out of fiberglass, but with advancements in technology, there are some newer, lighter, stronger, and more capable materials out there on the market. So a good majority of modern motorcycles are made of polycarbonate, which offers you a lot more versatility, strength, and impact protection. There are, of course, even more advanced fibers such as carbon fiber, and carbon fiber is 10 times stronger and 5 times lighter than steel. So no wonder it's a good material for a motorcycle helmet. There are also composite helmets out there, and that is taking a variation and a mixture of different advanced materials to build a compound. So that could include materials such as Kevlar. Basically, the helmet manufacturers out there are doing everything they can to be upfront with the technology and try and keep technology in the helmets as advanced as they can, trying to reduce the weight and increase the safety all at the same time. Now, while we're talking about safety, it is worth mentioning that there are various different certifications for safety certificates that motorcycle helmets can have. So depending on where you are in the world, that could be a DOT, it could be an ECE, a Sharp, a Snell, or an FIM. There are several different certification systems, and they put these helmets through their paces to ensure that they are safe in a variety of different crash and impact conditions. Now, we're not going to go into the depth between all those different certifications, but it is worth noting before you buy a motorcycle helmet that it does have a safety certificate, and that you're not buying one that doesn't have one, because unfortunately it is possible to buy a motorcycle helmet that doesn't actually meet some kind of safety requirements. Now we're going to talk about sizing. Now, size is incredibly important. I'm also going to give you a little bit of an example of how to measure your helmet at home without the need of anybody else to help you work out what size helmet you're going to go for. Now, the reason that your helmet size is so important is because if it's too big, it's actually going to be dangerous. It could flop and obstruct your vision, or worst case, in a crash, it could actually dislodge, come off, or put undue pressure on your neck. And if it's too small, it can give you pressure headaches and give you a pretty uncomfortable ride. So getting the right helmet size is incredibly important. It's worth bearing in mind as well that every single motorcycle brand has a slightly different sizing and shaping system for their helmets. So if a small in one brand doesn't fit you, a small in another brand might be comfortable, because they do have little unique qualities. So do put your head in a couple of different helmets. So how do you measure your helmet? Now, the easiest way to do this is with a tape measure, but if you don't have a tape measure at home, don't worry. Get yourself a piece of string. Any string will do, as long as it's long enough to go around your head. You're then going to put it around your head, around the widest point. It's going to come round just above your ears, up to your forehead, and then with your fingers, hold it where the string meets. So here is where I am. That is how long my head is. So you're going to find out how big my head is now. You're then just going to need a ruler. So this is a classic example of a ruler that you have at home. For the sake of the camera, because that one's clear, I'm going to use my giant yellow ruler here. And then you're going to put your string out onto your ruler. And there I have a 52 centimeter head, which is exactly what I thought it was. So that's a good test that my string task works. So that's going to give you a baseline for what size helmet you're going to be after. Obviously, when you're buying things online, that's going to be really important to know to work out which helmet to go for. Knowing your helmet size is the first thing. The most important thing is when it's actually on your head. So I'm going to give you an example. Right, so this is an extra large, size 61 to 62. So I can tell you now it's going to be too big for me, but I'll give you an example of what happens. Oh, where do you go? Imagine if that happened when you were riding along. It would be incredibly awkward. It's dangerous. It could pull my head off, rip my neck. It's too big. So if your helmet is going to be moving around, twisting, flopping, it's not going to be safe. You also, if you have, say, a full face helmet, don't want your nose or your chin hitting things. You often hear of people saying that you do want those cheek pieces to give you a little bit of a squeeze, because it's going to be holding your head safe and secure, but you don't want to be getting any kind of pressure headaches. So put the helmet on, wear it for a little while, and you'll get the feel as to how comfortable it is. And if you can do that without it moving, it's obviously a good sign. There are lots of different features on motorcycle helmets, so let's have a run through some of those things that are worth considering, and they really are to bring a little bit of extra comfort, versatility, and practicality into the helmet option. So the first one is when the sun comes out, and this helmet here has an example of that with the integrated sun visor. So there you go, lots of helmets have it as an option. You can just pop the sunshine shades down when the sun comes out behind those clouds. Next, you have the different kind of fastening. Now, this is really going to be a personal preference. So this helmet here has a quick release helmet system. So it slides in to engage, and then you lift and release. A lot less fiddly and easier on the fingers than a traditional double D. Here is an example of a double D. So you've got 2 rings. You're going to thread through both, back through one, and that's going to secure your helmet. And of course, on both of those, there's normally a popper to secure the little tailing end. It's really going to be down to personal preference, which type of fastener you prefer. Then we have the liners of motorcycle helmets. Now, if you think about the fact that you're potentially going to be spending many hours with your head in there, some people get quite sweaty heads, and every so often it's nice to be able to wash that liner. So checking whether your helmet has removable liners that you can then hand wash is worth thinking about if you're a particularly sweaty-headed person. And if you are a sweaty-headed person, ventilation is probably one to consider. So a lot of helmets have the option for ventilation on the top, on the chin, and sometimes around the back of the helmet. The ventilation can vary. Consider what sort of riding conditions you're going to be in when you think about ventilation, because if you're going to be out in a lot of cold weather, that chill on the brain might not be so favorable, but it would be perfect for the summer to get the air flowing. You then have the different visors that are available. Now, all of these helmets here are coming with a standard clear lens. A lot of helmet manufacturers will make mirrored, black, smoked, colored, different colored visors to factor for different light conditions or different color styles. You also have the capability of anti-fog functioning, for example, with pin lock. Now, this helmet here, you can see there is a little dot. Now, that is designed to be pin lock ready, but it doesn't have it installed. This helmet has the pin lock installed already. So inside here, we can see that there is an inner layer to the visor. That's, in a nutshell, giving you 2 layers of visor, which creates an insulated bubble, and that changes the temperature differentiation, which helps reduce fogging. We've all been at traffic lights trying to hold our breath, and that's something that can help with that. Next, you've got communication systems. Now, intercoms are ever advancing and more capable, and if it's something that you're wanting to ride with, to be able to chat to your pillions, your buddies, listen to music, have your navigation in your helmet, you want to consider whether there is space in the helmet in its original design to take that. Now, a lot of modern motorcycle helmets have that space already, but some actually come with communication ready, where they've actually got channels and special areas for those wires to go. Something to investigate. We then have the helmet accessories. Now, there's lots of different things that come with a helmet. For example, the pin lock anti-fog can come as standard, what sort of bag and protection the helmet comes with for you to keep it safe in transit or storage. Some helmets will come with additional cheek pads, liners and spaces to help really get that fit perfect for your head as well. We then have the most important part, the color, because obviously coordination is really important. There are a million different helmet designs, colors, variations out there, and pretty much the majority of the models out there seem to have different color options. So you're going to want to have a think about what sort of kit you're going to be wearing, what your bike color is, what your favorite color is, and then pick one that takes your fancy. The last thing to think about in buying a motorcycle helmet is your budget. Now, with pretty much everything in life, you get what you pay for. The more money you're willing to invest into a helmet, there's probably going to be a little bit more technology, maybe more safety tests, etc. So there we have it. There's all kinds of things to think about in buying a motorcycle helmet. And we very much hope that this video has helped give you a little bit of insight in which helmet to buy for you. Thank you so much for watching.